The February Revolution was accomplished by workers and peasants, the latter in the person of soldiers. But there still remains the great question, who led the revolution? Who raised the workers to their feet? Who brought the soldiers into the streets? After the victory, these questions became a subject of party conflict. They were solved most simply by the universal formula. Nobody led the revolution. It happened of itself. The theory of spontaneousness fell in most opportunely with the minds of not only of all those gentlemen who had yesterday been peacefully governing, judging, convicting, defending, trading, or commanding, and today were hastening to make up to the revolution, but also many professional politicians and former revolutionists who, having slept through the revolution, wished to think that they were not different from all of the rest. So that's Trotsky, History of the Russian Revolution. I've been reading through the history of the Russian Revolution, long book, just taking notes, marking, highlighting sections as I go through it. What I find especially fascinating about the timing of having been reading through the book, you get on social media and you see what's happening in Venezuela, and I certainly can't say that history will characterize what's happening in Venezuela or happened by the time this video goes live was a revolution. Certainly can see the parallels between what I'm reading during the Russian Revolution and what happened in Venezuela, and clearly not speaking about the United States by any means at all on this. Just interesting to see some of the parallels between what's going on. So you look at the Russian Revolution, there's a few factors. There's a few factors to consider, a few factors to go through, a few things I have highlighted that I want to read out in quotes. But essentially, the revolution starts out with the people, with the disgruntled workers. They weren't happy with the czars, the czarina. They started to build that up, right? That unhappiness built up in the population, led to demonstrations, which eventually led to the collapse of the capital. And there's a few things, once again, that fell into place along the way. There's essentially two groups, whether you're Russia, whether you're Venezuela, two groups that might stand between order and disorder, stand between order and chaos, between government and revolutionary. The police and the military, right? Those are the main two factors. There are certainly plenty, if we were speaking about the United States, of other three-letter agencies that may fall out of that category, but when we're talking about the history of the Russian Revolution, and certainly I'm seeing, once again, similarities to what we're seeing in Venezuela. There were two factors, two groups, the police and the military, the soldiers. Now, the soldiers, in this case, and reading a quote here from Trotsky, the soldiers supported the workers not because they were obediently fulfilling the commands of their officers, but because they felt themselves blood brothers of the workers as a class composed of toilers like themselves, the peasants and the workers. There are two social classes which made the Russian Revolution, so soldiers and the people. Now, the revolution started with what you could call demonstrations, right? There were a lot of demonstrations that occurred as the movement, the group, advanced forward towards the palace, towards the capital of Russia. The first group they confronted, of course, were the police. An interesting point in the Russian Revolution, as they described it in the book, as I understand it, they did not expect to turn the police on their side, right? When you look at, under the context of the Russian Revolution, you look at the police at the time, they took the job knowing that one thing they're going to do, right, is suppress the population, control the population, create order, right, create order from chaos. So for the police to go in and disperse an angry crowd with batons and any means necessary was normal, right? That's a normal part of the job. Soldiers, not so much, right? When you talk about the military, you talk about the soldiers. Soldiers don't generally sign up to shoot unarmed civilians, right? That's not what they're there for. As I said, the soldiers It's not what they sign up for. They go to maybe defend their country, national pride, defend the homeland, fight for an army, not necessarily gun down angry crowds of civilians that could be their neighbors, right? So this is another quote from the book. The psychological moment when the soldiers go over to the revolution is prepared by a long molecular process, which, like other processes of nature, has its point of climax. But how to determine this point? A military unit may be wholly prepared to join the people, but may not receive the needed stimulus. The revolutionary leadership does not yet believe in the possibility of having the army on its side and let slip the victory. After this ripened but unrealized mutiny, a reaction may seize the army. The soldiers lose the hope which flared in their breasts. They bend their necks against the yoke of discipline, and in a new encounter with the workers, especially at a distance, will stand opposed to the insurrection. In the process, there are many elements imponderable or difficult to weigh, many cross-currents, collective suggestions, and auto-suggestions, but out of this complicated web of material and psychic forces, one conclusion emerges with irrefutable clarity. The more the soldiers in their mass are convinced that the rebels are really rebelling, that is not a demonstration after which they will have to go back to their barracks and report, that is the struggle to the death, that the people may win if they join them, and that this winning will not only guarantee impunity but alleviate a lot of it. The more they realize this, the more willing they are to turn aside their bayonets and go over to them, the people. So it's an interesting point. So as I said, as the group of people formed, you could say leaderless, right? The insurrection, the Russian Revolution, did not necessarily have a ruling group behind it. It was a movement that grew organically within the population. There were leaders throughout, but not really leadership, if that makes sense. And once again, as they pressed forward, when they encountered the police, they did not expect, once again, they did not expect the police to turn on their side, something you see, or something I saw in clips of Venezuela. As I understand it, you actually did see police, right? You have the people very upset with the last election, forming into groups, potentially moving onto the Capitol, right? Certainly see that civil unrest. You do see police. I did see videos of police putting down their uniforms, coming over to the people. There was some of that. There was some of that in the Russian Revolution, where police would put down their uniform, put down their weapons. Maybe they kept the weapons, but come over to the side of the people. All in all, you look at the Russian Revolution. I can't tell you everything that's happening in Venezuela. The police held on till the end, right? They weren't willing to give up. They weren't willing to turn to the side of the people. That is their job. That is what they're trained to do, right? The other side being the soldiers. Strategically, as the insurrectionists approached the military, they felt that it was critical to be disarmed, right? If they approached the military with guns and shooting, instinctively, the soldiers are going to hold their position. They're going to shoot back. They're going to do what soldiers do. So they felt it was essential to approach the soldiers disarmed and show and demonstrate that this was it. This was the real deal. As the quote said, the rebels are really rebelling. It's not a demonstration. This is it. This is the real deal. They're willing to die for the cause. In showing that and not confronting the soldiers with violence, but with dedication, soldiers sort of flipped, right? You started seeing the military flip. And at that point, the Russian Revolution went from, say, a demonstration to a revolution, to the point that they overthrew the government. Once again, seeing that similarity in the clips of what we're seeing in Venezuela, or what little I did see while they were showing clips, whereas the soldiers started to flip. They're starting to turn towards the people. And at that point, once again, there's two things that stand between the government and the insurrection, which is the police and the soldiers. That peaceful approach, peaceful confrontation against the soldiers versus the police. Said no one expected the police to flip. So that may have gotten violent, and actually as the soldiers flipped to the side of of the movement of the people in Russia, they started to confront the police, right? The police were the last to go down. So interesting point, interesting approaches, a lot of history, I've enjoyed the book. I think Trotsky said it's been very, very easy to read, maybe compared to some other books, a lot of interesting information. It was a point in time in history, you could say 1917, long time ago that this happened. And I'm bringing it up because you're seeing it again. I feel that that's what we're seeing, what little we're seeing. I know there seems to be a lot of control over the information, but you see the election that happened in Venezuela recently. You see the people reacting. You see a movement growing. As I said, you see the videos where some of the police are actually coming over to the side of the people. And you see the military coming over to the side of the people. So interesting parallels between then, 1917, between now. Interesting strategy, if you could say that, whether it was intuitive or planned. I think there was a certain amount of planning. Once again, the revolution wasn't led through leadership, wasn't led by an organization, whether it was the Soviets, whether it was the Duma, whatever it was at the time. It occurred organically through the people, right? Through people that they mentioned a little bit of Lenin in there, but through education of the people, they sort of came together. Everyone sort of came together. There had been unrest leading up to that, but it hit a point, and an interesting point was on the day the government collapsed, the day the Tsar sort of issued his surrender. The insurrectionists, the protesters didn't even know they had won, right? They didn't know. They were just doing their thing. They were pushing forward. But two factors, I think that's what I wanted to call out. Interesting bit of history, would recommend the book. It is a long read. I think there's a lot of information there. But surprising parallels between the Russian Revolution, between what's happening in Venezuela, and an interesting take on, the two forces there, the police, which are fundamentally trained to meet opposition, armed or unarmed, from the civilian population, and then the soldiers that are not. That's not their job, right? And you don't know. As I said, even in the Russian Revolution, they weren't sure. They weren't really sure what the military was going to do, but they knew the best strategy. Approach disarmed, show your commitment, and some people got gunned down, right? Some people did get gunned down, but the military is only going to do that so much, right? That's not what they're there for. That's not what they're trained for. The police seem to do that a little bit more. They talk about machine gun nests. The police didn't seem to have a problem gunning down an unarmed civilian population in the Russian Revolution, of course. So I think it's important to know your history. I think there's a lot of good information there. Whether it's applicable to anything now or not, don't know on that, but it does seem to have a lot of parallels between what we saw recently in Venezuela, right? And on Chapter 8, who led the February insurrection? Answer being no one. So, it's not always a case of who's the leader of the movement. It is that the movement was. So, hope that helps out, right? Just sharing some edutainment, education, some entertainment, recommending the book, right? I think it's a good book. It's a long read. Interesting point, interesting approach to insurrection, to revolution, and interesting parallels with modern day. So, hope you enjoyed it. Hope that helps out. Thank you for watching, and we appreciate you.